Recording has been started. Okay, so where were we? We were talking about the difference between a car and war car. Now, one more topic we need to discuss on this: the difference between N car or car and sorry, N war car slash war car. All right. So when you declare, if you go back to my employee table. I'm using the class number 14 worksheet here. Okay. So if you already downloaded class 14, please re-download it because we are going to add a couple more here. Now, in this case, the middle name worker is, whatever worker is variable character of now it is 50 by default. Now I can also say N worker. What is the difference between a car and a N worker? Or forget about this, forget about the middle name. For gender, I can say instead of car, I can say N car. So wherever you can use war car or car, in all those places, you can add N in front of that. So it will make it as N car or N war car. Now, what is the difference between a car and a N car? Anyone? What's the difference between a car and a N car? Yes, so N-car, that's true. Yusuf say N-car includes Unicode. So let me ask you one question here before I explain the Unicode. Now, we all know that one character is stored in how many bytes? One character is?
1 byte.
1 byte, right?
Yes.
All right. One character is 1 byte. So what is the max? So if it is, how many bits are there in 1 byte? How many
8
bits?
bits.
8 bits.
8.
8 bits.
8.
8 bits consist of 1 byte. So what are the possible values with a 1 bit? With a 1 bit, what are the possible values you can have?
0 or 1.
0 or 1, that means 2, right? 2 possible values, which are 0 or 1, right? 0, 1. How about 2 bit? How many possible values with a 2 bit?
4.
How many?
2 raised to n.
2 raised to? It's going to be
N.
0, 1, 0, 1, sorry, 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, and 1, 1, right?
1.
So, so four possible values. How about 3? If you have 3
8.
bits, 8.
8.
So you can see, so with 3, you can, okay, sorry. With the 3 bits, you can see 8 possible values. Now, what is going to be that, the formula for that? 2 to the power of? 2 to the power of n, right? If you have n bits, it is going to be 2 to the power of n possible values. So if that's the case, how many possible values you can have with 1 byte of data? How many possible values with 1 byte? What's that?
2 to the power
2 to the power of 8. And what is that? 2 to the power of 8.
64?
2.
120.
2024.
100.
64?
128.
102, is that 128?
Yes, 128.
256, right? To the power of 8. 256 characters. So the 256 character is the maximum number of, please mute a microphone. Devin, please mute a microphone. Thanks.
I think that would be 512, right?
To the power of 8. 2, 4, 8.
256.
256. It's a pretty standard.
Yes.
256. So 256 possible value. Now, if you want to accommodate an English-like character set, well, 256 possible combinations are fair number because the number of characters in English like statement or English like language is less than 256, so we are fine. But in certain languages, you need to store more than 256 characters, right? So in that case, storing a single character as 1 byte is not sufficient. In that case, you need to go for double byte characters. Okay, so if you want to create a double byte character, that is when you define it as n varchar. So if I say n varchar, gender n varchar is still going to work, everything is going to be fine. The only drawback is that each character is going to be double byte. So if I declare the middle name as n varchar, what is the maximum string size for a middle name? If I say n varchar of 50 for middle name, what is going to be the maximum string size in terms of bytes? 100, right? So I mean, never ever, if you just want to store regular characters, you are not looking for any Unicode character. Unicode characters are characters needed double bytes. Okay, so if you're not planning to store double byte characters or Unicode characters, do not go for ncar or n varchar. Even if you go for it, it still work, but the problem is that you are just doubling up the size the storage needed to store that information. So this is the difference between n varchar and varchar. But the interview question is, what is the maximum size of a n varchar data type? What's the maximum size of an n varchar? Anyone? Is it car? How much is that? Is it, if it is varchar of 8,000, right? The maximum is going to be 8,000. But if it is n varchar, then it is going to be 4,000. Okay. All right. No, 4,000, 8,000 byte is the max. So it's a varchar, then it is, 1 byte is 1 character, so 8,000 characters. If it is n varchar, it is going to be 4,000 characters, which is equivalent to 8,000 bytes. All right. So that's the difference between a car, n-car, and a var car and a n varchar. All right. We have a couple of students are muted here. Susan, Sonia, and Sala. You all are unmuted. All right. So the next topic I want to discuss is the sequence number. I missed that when we talk about the new features of SQL Server, the SQL statement. So let's do that. Hold on a second. All right. So this is introduced in SQL Server 2012. Now, what was the method we learned before to automatically assign a value to a particular column in a table?
Identity.
Identity, yes. Please mute the microphone. All right. Identity is the option you have if you want to, assign a value. If you want the SQL engine to assign a value to a particular column every time you insert a record, right? Now, in 2012, Microsoft introduced this object called as sequence object. Okay, so let's take a look at what that sequence object is. So in the case of sequence object is a persistent object you create in the database. Okay, it is not, what is an identity? Identity that we talked about, identity is an object, or what is identity? Identity of a column, is it a object, or what exactly the identity is? It's a property, right? It is a property of a column. And how many identity columns possible per table? You can have only one identity. It is not an object. Yes, identity is not an object. But if you want to create a sequence number, all right, so you need to create that sequence number is on a persistent object. So the syntax for creating that is create sequence followed by a name for the sequence number, and then you need to specify what is going to be the data type. The data type is going to be a decimal one. Okay, decimal 3.0. And then what is going to be the starting value? Starting values, you can say starting value is 1. In this example, I'm just using it as 125. Just want to prove that you don't need not have to be starting from 1. The same thing with the seeding with identity, right? In the case of the seeding property of identity column, you can say what is going to be the starting value. So it can be anything. Now, what is going to be the incremental value? That is going to be 25 in this case. And what is going to be the maximum value? The maximum value is going to be, the minimum value is going to be 125. Well, that is true. And the maximum value, I can put it as 1000. So when you create a sequence number, you can specify what is the initial value, what is the incremental value, what is the minimum value, and then what is the maximum value as well. All right, let me save this just a second. All right. So let me go and create this sequence number, the sequence object on AdventureWork database. Valid value was
Daniel, are we creating a sequence to a table or to a database?
no, the sequence is an independent object.
Okay.
Okay. The cache size is greater than the number of available values. Yes. All right, so that's fine. The sequence is created. I mean, the already objects. So sequence is not associated with a particular table. It is an independent object. Okay. Now, if I want to find, before I start using this sequence number, if I just want to see what is the current value of that sequence, if you want to get further information about a particular sequence object, there is a system table called as sys.sequence. So you can query sys.sequence in order to get more information about that sequence number. The name of that sequence I created is DEC sequence, right? So if I do a select statement, you can see the current value is 125 because that is from where it is going to start. Now, if I want to increment this particular sequence number, what we can do is that, or the way you can use this sequence number is, if you say next value 4 followed by that sequence number, it is always going to increment that value. So next value for dbo dot sequence. So if the moment I issue this command is, what it is going to do is that it is going to increment the current value to the next, or it's going to add that incremental value to the current value. Now, if I want to see the next value, I mean, I cannot execute this statement alone. This statement need to be part of some other statement, for example, a select statement. So if I say select next value for dbo.sequence, so this is going to, all right. Okay, now that is done. Now the current value is 125. Now if I execute this again, now 150, 175, did you see that it is keep on incrementing? All right, so this is part of the select statement. Now, later I decided that, okay, I'm not using it as part of the select statement. What I want is that in place of an identity property of a particular column, I want to use this sequence number. All right, so let's take a look. Where is my, hold on a second. All right, so let me go and create this table one more time. So employee ID, primary key, good. Where I made the changes. Okay, I think this is a change I made. All right, I'm going to create this my employee table of, okay, that object already exists. Let me drop it and recreate it, okay? Please stay tuned. So drop table name and then recreate it. All right, it is referenced by, we need to drop that child table. So let's go back here, get rid of this. All right, so that's done. All right, so let's create that table again. So table is created. All right, now when I insert record into this table, this is my insert statement, which we were using for a couple of days now. So instead of providing an employee ID here, what I can do is that I can say next value for, instead of 1, I can say next value for, so when that sequence number 2, I can say this 1. Okay, so let me go and create this, execute these 2 insert statements. Hire date. Seems like we didn't provide a hire date, so let's include that.
You already the
What?
second insert statement.
Oh, it's
Higher date
already,
is already there in the.
it's already there. It's missing in the first one, right? Yeah,
Yes.
it is missing in the first one. So
Is it the first name we have it as a null?
no, I'm trying to find out. The hire date is here, and the hire date is not null. So provide a value for that.
No. For first name, you provided Yusuf, and then you have null for middle name, I think.
Middle name is fine. Middle name can accept null values.
Okay, that's right. Sorry.
Believe this is the. All right, so let's try again. All right, I'm getting crazy here. Where is it? Hire date. Well, hire date is
There are
already.
2 higher dates in the second. Yes.
How come? Good, right? So let me take a look. I don't know whether the first statement did go through or fine. So let's select start from my employee. Let's see. No, nothing is inserted. Okay. All right. So let's go for the first statement here. All right. One record get inserted. Now, if you do a select statement here, you can see that the employee ID is 275, and how that 275 is there, because I'm trying to get the next value for that from that particular sequence number. Now, if I execute a second insert statement, all right, so that is also gone. So now if you look at that, you can see the employee ID is 300. So now what is a sequence object? Sequence object is very similar to an identity column. But sequence object is a persistent object, and you can create it, and then you can use it anywhere you want by saying next value for the sequence number. When you define the sequence number, you can specify what is going to be the initial value, what is going to be the incremental, what is the minimum value, what is the maximum value. You can also specify what is a data type. That is what a sequence number is. So sequence number people now start using as a replacement for
Identity.
Identity. Yes.
Then I have a question.
Yes.
When you do the when you started, you said as decimal 30. What's that 30?
I mean, when you define decimal data type, when I say 8,3, let's say 8,3. Well, you don't normally say 3,0, because when you say 8,3, you're telling that, okay, there is going to be there's going to be a total of 8 digits Out of that, 3-digit is going to be after decimal, so 5-digit is going to be before decimal. So the maximum value can be stored in 8,3 is
8.
5.
5.
okay. So it is going to be 5 digits prior to decimal. That means 5 nines, and 3-digit after decimal. So this is a maximum value can be stored in a decimal 8,3.
Okay, thanks.
Daniel, what if the sequence number exceeds a maximum?
It is going to generate an error. It is not going to. It is exceeds the maximum value, and then after that, if you say next value 4, then it is going to generate an error saying that it exceeded the maximum value.
Okay.
And identity, one of the drawback of identity is that you cannot specify what is the maximum value. So if you want a maximum value, you want a cutoff value, then that's when we normally go for sequence number. Okay.
So
Yes.
is it possible to create a sequence without a maximum number?
Creating a sequence without, let's take a look. I believe it is possible. Never tried that. So let's take a look. I'm going to say test sequence. Okay. Certainly possible.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I believe the max is going to be the max value for an integer.
Okay.
All right. So now
it's not quite clear to me. Why do you use this? When do you use this sequence number?
The sequence number is a replacement. Microsoft came up with sequence number as a replacement for identity property of a column. Because in the case of an identity, how many identity columns possible per table? You can only have one. What if you have a table where you have 2 columns, you want to generate dynamic numbers? Dynamic sequence number. If you're using identity, you cannot do that, right? But you can have the sequence number can be used n number of times in an insert statement or in an update statement. So there's no limitation on the maximum number of columns where you can use the next value for a dynamic sort of sequence number. But if you use the identity column, you can only use the identity column along with one single table. So if you have a table which consists of or you want 2 columns, which is an identity column, there's no way you can do that. So the replacement is the sequence number.
So I can use the sequence number in different tables at the same time?
Different tables and different columns in the same table, yes.
Okay.
Yes. Don't think that the sequence number is tied to a one single table. But normally what we will do is that we will tie to a one single table. Otherwise, what will happen? Please mute the microphone. A lot of noise. Please mute the microphone. Thank you. All right. So if you tie a sequence number with so many different tables, then you won't get that effect of sequence, right? Because the value 125 will be in table A, the value 150 will be on table B, value 175 on value C. So you don't really see, everything will work fine, but if you're truly looking for that sequence, you are not going to see it if that sequence number is used across multiple tables.
So the value which increment does not depend on the table?
No, it is not. It is an independent object. It is I would consider it as an independent counter, which can be used by n number of tables.
So could you please tell us like what will be like a organizational purpose of the sequence number, like a company purpose?
It's I mean, nowadays people use it purely as a replacement for identity column. Wherever you can use an identity column, in all those places you can use a sequence number. The only thing is that if you truly want a sequence for that particular column, for that particular table, then that sequence number should only be used for that particular table. Now, if you don't care about the sequence, you just want every time when a record inserted into table A, B, or C, and you just want a unique number, then that sequence object can be used on all three tables. But if you want a purely sequence number, then we always tie a sequence object with one particular table. So to answer your question, it's more like a replacement for identity column. And additional advantage of a sequence number is the multiple columns in the same table can use the same sequence number. And you can, so because of that reason, multiple columns in the same table can now create a sequence number. But if you are purely used prior to SQL Server 2012, there is no way you can use or create multi-column table with, table with a multiple identity columns. It's not possible, but with the sequence number, sequence object, you could able to do that.
Daniel,
Yes.
if it's a truly replacement for identity column, why is it identity column is still there then?
It's still there because it's supported as part of the ANSI 92 standard. The sequence number is actually part of the SQL Server, the SQL 2013 standard. We talked about SQL standards, right? In the class number 1 or 2, we talked about, yes. So, because, I mean, we talked about a couple of other useless statements like intersect, except. Why all those statements are still there? Because it's a part of the ANSI 92 standard.
Daniel, you are saying that in one table we can use both sequence or identity?
You can certainly use, because it's two different things, right? So if you want to create a table where one column is say identity column and the other column is using the sequence subject, perfectly fine.
Okay.
Daniel?
Yes?
So the sequence number, will it be unique or it can accept duplicate?
No, it cannot duplicate it. You can never go back. You cannot reseed it. It's purely a sequence. In the case of identity, you can reseed it, but the sequence object cannot be reseeded. You can drop and recreate it. That's the only thing you can do.
But if you have like a two sequence number, then the combination should be unique, right? So one column can have repetition.
What do you mean by that?
Like if you have a two sequence number, then combination should be unique, right? Not the individual column.
Why? No, the sequence number, I don't understand why it is going to be, why it has to be unique. Each sequence column has its own value. I'm not sure what you mean by that.
They both are different objects.
They're two different objects. I can, yeah, it's two different objects, two independent objects. You can have n number of sequence objects in the same database. We created this sequence number first, which is dboseq, and then we also created another one called as test sequence. So you can have n number of sequence object in the same database.
Oh yeah, okay, got it.
Daniel, if we are using the multiple sequence number in the same table, then what will be the second column value for the sequence number?
Whatever the next value for that sequence. If I use, for example, I'm just copying this, okay?
Okay.
I decided that for social security number, I mean, we cannot use it, but let's say social security number, I use it second time. So this is going to be the first time, so that's going to be the next value. So let's say initial value is 125. When SQL engine see this, it is going to be 150. When SQL engine see this, that's going to be 175.
Okay. And again, in the employee ID is 200, like that one.
Right. Yes.
Okay.
Sir, how to delete that object?
Well, you can delete it as long as there is no other object is using that. Right now, if I try to drop it, I mean, you can say drop sequence name, but it is going to generate an error if that sequence is referred by any other statement.
Okay, thank you.
And I believe you can also define it when you create the table. You can define, maybe not. Maybe I'm wrong. Never used it. Seems like I cannot. Was wondering whether I could able to define it along with the table creation statement. But it's just an object. You can alter it or you can drop it anytime you want, as long as it is not being referred by an object. Okay. All right. So now we are going to talk about a different topic called as user-defined functions. So in the previous classes, we talked about various string function. Please mute the microphone, please. We talked about various system defined function, like we talked about string functions, aggregate functions, and then you did a lab on date and time functions, and there are a lot of mathematical functions. So if you want to see all the built-in functions in a database, you go to AdventureWork database or any database and then expand the programmability, and then where is it, functions, expand that function folder. Now there is a system function and then aggregate when most of the aggregate function. That's very strange. Aggregate function folder is empty. I need to check that. Anyway, so if you expand the system, oh, here you go. Somehow aggregated functions is actually under the system function, which makes sense. All right, so expanded. These are some of the min, max, but there are a couple of other aggregate functions. If you want, you can check it out, but not properly used, not popularly used. But the min, max, average, we pretty much covered most of this. Now, if you look at the string functions, we talked about a lot of these string functions, right? Now, then you have mathematical functions, which we did not talk. It's pretty straightforward. I mean, you can do further research on it in case if you're curious about any of this, or if you mouse over, you can, the SQL engine is going to give you what the purpose of that particular one. Now, so there are a lot of built-in functions in SQL Server which you can use. Now, you can create your own functions, and there are three type of functions you can create. So a function which a user can create is what we called as user-defined function. There are three type of user-defined function. The first one is scalar. Let me open a second. Let me open the file. All right, the first one is called as user-defined function, the scalar user-defined function. The second line is inline table value user-defined function. The third one is multi-statement table value user-defined function. Don't get scared by these names because it's very simple. So the first one is scalar user-defined function. The second one is inline. Copy. Inline table value user-defined function. The third one is multi-statement. All right, so these are the three of them, and I can guarantee that 99.99% of time you're only going to deal with scalar user-defined function. Inline table value user-defined function can be easily replaced by a better method called as views. And multi-statement, it comes with a lot of performance issues, so we normally don't go for multi-statement, but scalar user-defined function is what we always use. So let's see an example for scalar user-defined function. Now my requirement is I want to generate a function which can, what is a function, by the way? In any programming language, what is a function? How do you define a function? Anyone? What is a function?
I think a function is something you can use to get the value.
Okay. Any other comments on function? What is a function?
Function is something that you call it and use it in your program or in the logic. So we can decrease the length of your program.
Okay, and well, that's code reusability, right?
Yes.
Any other comments on functions from any other students?
A process by which a query is being processed.
Okay.
A simple
Store
statement.
code which can be used multiple times and can return value.
Can return value. All right. All right. So function is nothing but a block of code which can be executed by a calling program. Function cannot execute by itself. Function is a block of code, and that block of code cannot be executed by itself. There should be a calling program. Okay. And the calling program will call the function, and the calling program can pass parameters or values into that function. The code inside the function will accept these parameters coming from the calling program. Using that, it is going to execute whatever code defined inside the function, and at the end there is going to be the function can return value back to the calling program. So function is a block of code. That's a first property. A function can accept input parameters, input values from the calling program, and function can return value back to the calling program, right? All right. So my requirement is that I want to generate a function which can accept the contact ID, and then I want to that function should return a fully qualified name for that particular contact. Let's say in the Adventure Work database in the application, let's say there's a team of 5 developers developing application on top based on Adventure Work database. Now, these developers, if I ask them to display the fully qualified name of my customers on 10 different locations in my application, there is a possibility that they can come up with 10 different ways they want to display the fully qualified name. So what I want is that every time if I want a standardized fully qualified name, well, I want to create a user defined function. Then I can say that, hey, guys, anytime if you want to display my customer name, just call this function, pass in that contact ID, so that the function will always return the fully qualified name in the format of last name comma first name space middle name. So that is what my requirement is. So my requirement is create a function which can accept contact ID as input meter and return a fully qualified name of the contact. All right, so let's do that. So this function is expecting this function which I'm going to create is having one input parameter, and it is going to have one output parameter too. What is going to be the input parameter? The input parameter is going to be the contact ID, and the output parameter is going to be the fully qualified name. So if I want to create a function is a persistent object, create followed by what type of object I am trying to create. Function. The name of the function is, I'm going to call it as full name. Okay. Now open the bracket. Now you need to list all the input parameters. Now in this case, there's only one input parameter. So input parameter is always going to be prefixed with an @ symbol. So the input parameters are always prefixed with an @ symbol. So and then you need to give a name for that input parameter. So int, I'm going to say contact ID. All right. Now you also need to specify a data type for that input parameter. So that's going to be int contact is going to be an integer. Now the reason why I put int here, because it's always a common practice when you declare a variable or a parameter, the first 3 character indicates what type of data type it is. Okay. So if somebody, let's say later in this code, if I use this, so when I look at that the parameter name, I clearly know that this is an integer parameter. Okay, so when you declare variable in this particular function itself, we are going to see how to declare variables in SQL Server. So when you declare the variable, also the first three characters, a common coding practice that the first three character indicates what type of data type, what is the data type of that particular variable. So here, this particular function, we have only one input parameter. Let's assume that we have multiple input parameter. If you have multiple input parameter, let's say int abc, well, you can separate that with a comma and then you can list all the parameters. Okay, so you can have n number of parameters. The maximum number of parameter is 2100. Okay, that is true for functions, store procedures, etc. The maximum number of input parameter is 2100. We don't go anywhere near to that. All right, now you need to specify what is going to be the return data type. What is going to be the data type of the return value? So what we are trying to return here? We are trying to return the fully qualified name, right?
Yes.
Okay. Now what can you give me the data type for a fully qualified name?
Varchar.
Varchar. I mean, we can go for 1000, assuming that the combination is going to be less than that. All right, Varchar. That. As then there is the body of the function. So whatever you are going to write between that begin and end block, that is what going to be the body of the function. Now the way you can identify whether the function is a scalar function or a inline table value or a multi-statement depends on what you see in this return parameter. Now, the reason why this function is called a scalar function, because it is only returning one scalar value back to the calling program with data type varchar of 1000. So scalar user defined function will return only one value back to the calling program. How about the inline? We haven't discussed the inline yet. The inline is going to return a tabular structure. Something with the rows and columns is what going to be returned by inline, and multi-statement also is going to return a table value, but in the case of scalar, it is going to return only one scalar value back to the calling program, and the data type of that scalar value is varchar of 1000. That's how you identify whether a function is a scalar function or an inline or multi-statement. All right, so where do I see, if I have the contact, if I know the contact ID, where do I see the fully qualified name? Or which table contains the first name, last name, and middle name? Anyone?
Person.contact.
Person.contact. You're doing the labs. All right, so person.contact. All right. So now I have the contact ID. It's very easy to get the first name, last name, and middle name, concatenate it, and then make it as a fully qualified name. So let's do that. I'm going to comment this. Select, I'm going to put a star there. Select star from person.contact. Where contact ID equals
int contact.
Add int contact ID.
All right, great. Now I don't want a star. I want to get that fully qualified name. I want to concatenate the first name, middle name, and last name. So if I want to do that, first name, what is a concatenation operator? Anybody remember? What is
Plus.
the plus?
Oh.
Single quote, comma, single quote, because not first name, last name.
Not comma.
Last name, because my fully qualified name, the format of the fully qualified name I want is that last name, comma, first name, space, middle name, right? So that's why I put a comma here. And then after that, plus?
Middle name.
No, first name, right? first name, last name, comma, first name, space, middle name. So we need to put a space plus middle name.
Middle name.
All right. All right. So this is going to give me a fully qualified name, but what is the danger here? Well, the middle name can accept null values, right? So in a string concatenation, if one of the column is one of the concatenation value is null, the entire string is going to be null. So how do I eliminate or how do I mask the null value in the middle name?
We can use use
Not
null.
not.
NBL.
Middle name.
Is null function. Yes, we need to use the is null function. We need to replace that null value with is 0 character string. Okay. Now let's see whether it really works. So I'm going to copy this statement here, and then I'm running it for contact ID 1. Okay, let's take a look. Contact ID 2, it works. Good. Okay. All right, so that definitely worked. Now, so this is going to give me the fully qualified name. Now, how do I return this back to the calling program?
You can say, I think, return.
Return. Yes, return is going to return the value back, but what exactly?
When you call the function, it's going to return the value.
Well, I mean, this select statement is going to generate that fully qualified name, but how we should tell the SQL engine this is what this concatenated value is what need to be returned back to the calling program. For that,
we have to take the name in some variable.
Yes, we need to generate a variable here. Now in SQL Server, if you want to generate a variable, the syntax for that is declare. Okay. Now it always going to prefix with @sign. So in SQL Server, if you see an @sign, it is either going to be an input parameter or it is going to be a user-defined variable. Okay. So I'm going to call this one as var full name and varchar of 1000. And if I want to initialize, in any programming language, when you declare a variable, it is always a good practice to initialize that variable with some initial values. So if I want to initialize it, well, I want to initialize with a 0 character string and then put a semicolon. And here also start using semicolon. It's a good practice now. Now, the next question is, so you declare a variable here. Now at the end, I need to say whatever the value in that variable, I want to return it back to the calling program. So I can also say, okay. So I declared the variable. I'm saying that at the end, whatever the value in that variable need to be returned back to the calling program. Now, how do I assign that fully qualified name to this variable?
To use in this variable.
I can say variable name equals. You can say variable name equals whatever that fully qualified name is. So you can use a variable name equals inside a select statement. All right. Now this is one method. Another method, let me comment out this. Another method of assigning value to a variable from a select statement is you can say set. We will see the advantage and disadvantage of both methods because it is there in the certification exam. But I mean, we will have that discussion very shortly. But let me show you what the two different approaches here. I'm going to take this one out. All right, so this is another method. If I want to assign a value from a select statement into a variable, so this technique will also work. But there is a difference between these two. We'll be seeing that very shortly, okay? So I'm going to comment this.
Daniel?
Yes?
Where we declared in the first place and we assigned a blank value, can we just set the variable over there also?
Set the variable means? Set the variable?
Set variable at full name equals the query, right? At the bottom when you just commented out right now.
Uh-huh. Yeah, you can do that.
So
we can do that. Yes. All right. So
Daniel,
uh-huh.
can you write like this, like return and in parentheses the select statement?
You can do that if you are only pass. I mean, if it's a pretty simple, straightforward select statement like this, you can say return in bracket. You can, instead of declaring the variable, you can say return in bracket. You can see, you can specify that select statement as well.
Okay.
Daniel, I'm sorry. Can you just explain why do you create a variable? Why do you declare a variable over there for?
Because I want to, I want to capture that fully qualified name generated in the select statement into a variable, and then I want to, in this particular case, I'm pretty much, once I that value get assigned to that variable, I'm just passing that variable back to the calling program. Just assume that, once I receive that variable, if I want to do further processing, I want to make sure that, for example, I want to make sure that there is no single quote. Sometimes in the name you can have single quotes, right? You want to eliminate the single quote and eliminate some space. So if you want to do further processing, that is when you assign that to a variable, and that whatever the value in that variable can be further processed, and then whatever the end result, that is what need to be returned back to the calling program. So to answer your question, yeah, in this example, the reason why I use this variable here, because I want to capture that into a variable, and then whatever the value in that variable, that is what I am returning back to the calling program using that return command.
Daniel,
Yes.
is there a concept like declaring a global and local variable like in programming language?
In SQL Server, no, there's no concept of global variable. It's always going to be local variable.
Okay.
There's something called as a system variable, but system variable, you cannot define a system variable. Only you can use all those global system variables, but you cannot create a user-defined global variable or system variable now.
Okay.
How else can we use the variable in the same function? Is there any other way we can extend this function and do some additional processes on that variable?
On the inside the same function?
Yes. Before we return, let's say we want to modify it,
Sure,
do something.
you can do whatever you want with that value in that variable. Before you execute that return command, you can process whichever way you want.
Okay.
We'll be seeing that.
Okay.
All right. So let me go and create this function. So function is created. So now where do I see this function? So if I want to see that function, that is going to be under, go to that database, expand the programmability, expand the function, and then you can see a separate folder called as scalar valued function, expand it, and then you can see full name here. That's the name of the function, right? And then expand it, expand the parameter. You can see the parameter you are trying to pass. Okay. Now, how do I call this function?
Select function name.
All right. Select function name. So let me open another window here. So for class number 15 and the next couple of classes, you will be having 2 worksheets. Okay. All right. So if I want to call this function, so I can say dbo dot. What is the name of the function? The name of the function is
Full
name. And I am going to say the input parameter contact ID is going to be 1. So this is going to give me the fully qualified name of the contact ID 1. 10 means fully qualified name of contact ID 10, right? Now, my requirement is that I want to display all the contact IDs and their fully qualified name. How do I do that?
Using select statement.
Yes.
Select all.
Select start from person.contact. And then I want to display the contact ID. It's already there in that table. And then full name in bracket. The bracket, what is going to be the value? If I want to call this particular function for all the records in this table, contact ID. Right, here we go.
So the function name doesn't have to be character restricted. It doesn't have to be capitalized or anything.
No, it's by default SQL Server is not case sensitive.
Okay.
So you can see everything is for how many times this function get called? How many times this function is going to be called?
19,000.
19,972 times. All right. So a scalar user-defined function can be used wherever you define or use a regular column. You can use it as part of the select clause. You can use it as part of the order by or having or group by. Wherever you use a regular column of a persistent table, in all those places you can use scalar user-defined function.
Then we can provide star and then we can do dob dot full name contact ID.
Right. And the last column is going to be the fully qualified name.
Daniel,
Huh?
you cannot use the function with like insert, update, delete.
That's I'm about to say.
Can we join a function with a table?
Very good question. You can. We need to use something called as cross apply and outer apply. You cannot use the regular inner join and outer join. There's a concept called as cross apply and outer apply, which we'll be seeing in tomorrow's class. All right. So let's go back to our. Now, if I don't want to return that whatever the fully qualified name in that variable immediately collects receiving that value, I want to do further processing. For example, if this fully qualified name consists of any let's say single quote or any for example what's it, dashes. Okay, sometimes people put dashes and you want to eliminate the dash before you return it back. So how do I eliminate it? So you need to say set equals which function I need to use if I want to replace a dash with a space. Which function I need to replace?
Oh.
Yes. Replace. Please mute the microphone, please.
Daniel, we can declare a variable outside the begin, right?
No.
Begin and end?
No, because there's only local variables, so it has to be inside that object. You cannot declare that outside. There's no concept of global variable in SQL Server.
Okay.
You can, but I mean, in this statement you can, but the thing is that you need to execute it together. But the problem is that if you declare it outside, but once the function is created, it's only going to execute whatever is there between the begin and end. So when SQL Engine execute that block of code, the body of the function declaration is not inside the body, SQL Engine is going to generate an error.
Okay, so the very first return value is going to return whatever value that is passed through the int contact ID, right?
No, here in the returns followed by varchar, you are only telling the SQL Engine that, okay, this function, at the end of this function will return a value which is data type varchar of 1000. That's only.
So that return value actually returns the value whatever which is provided by the function.
No, here it's not going to it's not here in this statement in line number 47 you are not going to return any value. Only thing you are saying that this function at the end it is going to return a varchar of 1000. Now what is the value with that varchar 1000? That is going to be defined by your return statement here, which is line number 59.
Okay.
So this is just a declaration saying that, hey, I'm going to return a varchar of 1000 at the end. That's it. Now, what is the actual value? That is something you define with your return statement. Okay. Now, if I want to make changes to an existing, now we modified the code, right? Now, how do I, apply these changes. If we want to make structural change to an existing object, which DDL statement I need to use?
Alter.
Alter.
Alter function name. All right, so that is done. So before we proceed further, let's explain, because this is 2 certification exam based on the difference between declaring variables on or assigning a value to a variable from a select statement. That I mentioned that there are 2 different ways. So let's take a look at method 1. So in the method 1, I'm not using the function. I'm going to do something outside the function here. So I declare a variable. Okay. Now I'm using this method to assign a value into that variable. So, and I'm hard coding the value of 1 here. And then at the end, I'm going to print whatever the value in this variable. Simple, pretty straightforward. So let's execute that. You got the result, right? I hope no questions on that. Now, in the same method, if I am providing a value, so I'm going to say ABC as the initial value, okay? All right, just put an ABC there, and then we can guarantee that ABC is replaced by the fully qualified name. How about if I give a contact ID which doesn't exist? Or what I'm trying to ask is that if the select statement is not going to return any value back, is it going to replace that value ABC or?
No, it gives ABC.
All right, so let's take a look. So if the select statement doesn't return a value back, it is still going to keep that whatever the initial value ABC. Okay. How about if that select statement is going to return more than one value, greater than 1? What is going to be the result?
ABC.
So here the select statement is going to return more than one record.
I think it will be the last record.
It is
I
always.
think it will return result set, right?
No, no, it's not, because it's a variable. Variable can only hold one value, right? Variable, scalar, any variable you declare by default is a scalar variable. Scalar variable means it can only hold one value. So it's not going to generate an error. You can see who crystal is the last record in that person.contact, and so the last record value is what going to be displayed. So in method 1, if there is exactly one record returned, then the initial value is going to be replaced by that fully qualified name. If no record, it is going to retain the initial value. More than one record, it is going to replace. It's only going to use the last one. Okay. Right. So now let's talk about the second method. Method 2. So let's start with the equal to sign. Okay. All right. So let's do. All right. No complaints. Replace the initial value with whatever that one single value. Now, if this is not going to return any value back, what's going to be the outcome? Is it going to retain the initial value, or what does it do?
It will give the initial value.
ABC, right?
I mean ABC.
No. It is, no, you are not seeing anything. When you say print var full name, you are not seeing anything. What does that mean?
That means we have a blank character, 0 character string.
No, it's not. It is a null value.
So it's not showing null.
So it is not displaying anything. So if the select statement is not going to return any value back, that is equivalent to a null. So a null value is what assigned to that variable. So that is the main difference. So in the case of method 1, it will retain the initial value, but in the method 2, it is not going to retain it. It is going to replace that with null value. So that's first difference. Now take a look at this one. The third condition, if I am going to return, if that select statement going to return more than one value, it is going to
First one.
generate an error.
Oh.
So definitely there is a difference between method 1 and method 2. Okay, I mean, if as long as you are only that select statement is only returning one value, you don't see any difference. But if it is no record or more than one record, definitely there is a difference between these two methods. Now, which one is your preferred one? Which one you prefer? The method 1 or method 2?
First one.
Any particular reason? Why you prefer the method number 1?
Because it will accept the means
It would depend on the
equal no less than greater than that.
Well, I mean, you cannot say that if it is more than one record. I mean, I prefer to have this error because at least I know that this select statement is returning more than one record. In method number 1, I'm not getting any errors, so I'm not even aware that there are more than one record retrieved by that select statement, right? So, I mean, as a programmer, I like to see that error so I can fix it. But in method number 1, it's not showing the error, so I might be completely unaware about that situation. But I prefer method number 1 because of another reason. The reason is, let's say I want to retrieve value from 2 different columns and assign to 2 different variables. The contact, I believe person.contact contains the email address too. Let me quickly check that. Email address is there. Now, along with that fully qualified name, I also want to assign this email address to another variable. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to declare a variable here, another one. So declare, I'm going to say str email varchar of, let's say 100, whatever that initial value is. All right, so now if I want to assign that email address to this particular variable, do I need to write another select statement, or can I include that in the same select statement? I can include that in the same select statement. So email address. All right, you can do that. And let's print it. Equals 1. Right, you got it, right? Now in the second method, let's go to the second method now. Declare the variable. Now, if I want to assign a email address back to that variable, how do I do that? I cannot, yeah, I need to have a second select statement because this particular select statement can only return one value back to that variable. So I need to have a second statement here. So second statement looks like okay.
Email ID.
Is it email address, right?
Yeah.
All right. So if I declare it, okay, what is wrong here? Okay, I should not say, I'm sorry. You're right. I should not say this. There you go. So if you are now, if you are only retrieving one value from a particular select statement into a variable, Well, it doesn't matter whether you use method 1 or method 2. You need to be careful about the situations where no record or more than one record. But other than that, both is going to give you the same result. But in any scenario where if you want to retrieve more than one column value into more than one variable, that's when I prefer method number 1, because instead of writing multiple select statement, you can handle all those things with one single select statement. Clear?
Question. The str you put before the email, is it because it's a string, or could you have used anything?
It's a, you mean this one?
Yeah, but yeah.
It's a varchar, so it's going to be, the data type is a varchar, so it is going to be a string.
Okay, do we have to specify that string, like use str email, or can you be anything?
Anything in the sense?
Like assuming I want to use CFP email.
Yeah. I mean that's all string, right? String means anything. Alphanumeric characters, alphabets or numeric values, not issues.
Okay. All right. Now, assuming that the first one declared the variable character full name, so we put that var because it was a variable character, right?
I'm sorry, can you come over again? Which line you are talking about?
Just the place you were before. So that method 2, like line 1, so declare at var full name. So that's because that full name is a variable character. That's why we put var, right?
You're talking about, yeah, I mean, you can use string or var. I mean, it's your preference which way you want to. Sometimes I use the var, but you can use, this is just a variable, this is something you define, but it's always a good practice to use standardized format. So definitely it is going to be var. Doesn't make any difference, but better to use var.
Okay.
Is it mandatory to give some initial value to the variable, or if we don't give any initial value?
You don't need to provide an initial value, but it is all in any language. It is always a good practice when you declare a variable, because when you declare a variable, declaration doesn't mean what is a variable. Variable is a memory location, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, when you declare a variable, that is not going to create that memory location. The memory location actually get created when that variable used for the first time. Okay, so it is always a good practice. It's always a good practice. Declare and initialize it so that you can guarantee there is a memory location created immediately.
Okay.
So it's a good practice in any not only in SQL, in any programming language. Declare and initialize. Okay. All right. So let's take a 5 minutes break here. 10:12. Come back at 10:17, and we will continue with user-defined functions. Okay. 5 minutes break.
Daniel, are you there?
All right, so let's continue here. For Sana, you have been unmuted. All right, so let's continue our discussion here. Now, one of the limitation of a scale, not only scale, one of the limitation of any type of user-defined function is it doesn't support transactions. When I say transaction, we haven't covered the transaction or transactional statements yet. Transactions in general, we are talking. When I say transaction in general, we are talking about insert, update, delete statements. Okay, so inside a function, you can retrieve data, you can do any kind of calculation, and then you can return a value back, but you cannot insert or update or delete records into an existing table. The only exception is that if you create, you can create a, later we will be seeing something called as a um, uh, table variable. Okay, and you can only insert records into a table variable. So but other than that, there's no way the function doesn't support inserting or updating, deleting record into a persisting table. Persistent table. Okay, that's one of the drawback, not the drawback, one of the limitation of a user-defined function. Now, if I decide that I created a function and let's say I'm the DBA, I created the function, and let's say Ajay is a developer and I want Ajay to use this function, but I don't want Ajay to see what is there inside that function, because I want to hide the body of the function from Ajay. I don't want to expose this part of the function to Ajay, but I still want Ajay to call the function, pass the parameter, but I don't because at any point if Ajay log in, okay, forget about all these things. When Ajay log in and then he see this, and he can definitely right click on this function and then say modify, and since he's having the modify right, he can see whatever is there in the body of the function. Or he can right click on this and script function as create to and new query window, he can see what is there in the body of the function. So there are ways a user can or a developer can see what is there in the body of the function. Now if I want to hide that, what you can do is you can say with all right, with encryption. So when you create a function with encryption, let's see what kind of difference it is going to make. Okay, so all right, function is altered. Now let's right click and refresh this scalar, and then he can, let's go and call this function, that encrypted function. I can still call that function, no issues. I can see all those things. Let me save this part. Hold on. So this is class 15B. Okay, I said there's going to be 2 worksheets. Now, if I right click on this function and then say modify, I get an error saying that cannot be scripted, data is not accessible. So and then let's try the second method. If I right click on this and then script function as, all right, you cannot see that. So what is that encryption means, guys? What is that with encryption means?
No more changes.
Protect the data from the outside user.
Not the data, the code, right? The body of the function.
Sorry, code. Yes.
The body of the function is not visible for whoever calling this function. Only thing he or she can do is just call the function, pass the parameter, and return, and then accept the return value back. So that is what.
So can we decrypt it?
Only if you have the original code. Okay, so in this case, who is having the original code? I have the original code, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you need the original code to decrypt it. The decrypting is very simple. You execute this alter statement again by commenting out that with encryption line so that it is going to be decrypted. Now, with encryption is not only available in functions, it is available in views, triggers, and popularly on stored procedures. Because if you are working on a third-party application, let's say you are supporting a third-party application, all the whoever the application developer is definitely going to encrypt this function. I mean, they don't have any issues you seeing that code, but then if you expose the code, there's a possibility that you will make some changes, and that is going to create some unwanted results. So to avoid all those things, I mean, they encrypt it so that you cannot see what is there inside that views or functions or stored procedures.
Say for example, if I wanted to add something more to whatever functions that you have created over here, so what I can do, I can copy it.
Can you come over again? I did not pay attention. I was looking to students' chat. Yes, please. Can you come over
Okay,
again?
for example, if I wanted to add something more into the functions which you have created, so what basically I can do?
You cannot do anything. If you don't have the original code, you cannot do anything. You need to come back to me, and then I will make the change.
Okay.
So that's a good thing. I mean, so trust me, if you are working on a multi-developer environment, I mean, I prefer if you want to control, if you don't want anybody accidentally or intentionally make changes, then you always want to encrypt the function.
Means in this case, no one will be able to make any changes. Suppose if
I'm not saying that no one. Let's say if you want to make some changes, and if I am willing to give you the original code with encryption statement, you can run that, and then you can make changes. Whoever having this original statement can make changes.
Will I be able to give access to any chosen person? For example, if you want to give access to one of us, can we do it?
Give
through
access
the code
to
or
call the function or modify the function.
yeah, just to alter or
Yes, I mean, yes, I mean, because most of the cases, when you are on an application development environment, the developers my application developers might have privileges to make changes to the database. Okay, but even if let's say you are my application, you are actually developing the .NET application for adventure work, but as a DBA, even if you have the access, I don't want you to make changes on my objects. So I encrypt it. Now, I mean, security wise, you have the privilege to make changes to this function, but because I encrypted it, you do not know what the original code is, so you cannot make any changes there. So if you're talking from the security perspective, yes, you have the update alter privilege. Now, because it is encrypted and you do not know what the original code is, you cannot make any changes there.
can you just show us one of the encrypted function? Like, I just want to see how it looks like.
It is
Or is it like, are we able to open a function? I mean, just to know what, or
here you go. You right click and say modify. This is what you are going to get.
oh, okay. It won't actually let you even to open the file.
No.
Okay.
mean, suppose if we have two users, to one user, it's okay, we don't want to show the code, but to other user B, if we want him to, we are okay to, if he makes any changes, how we can do
we need to share that original code. He can make the changes in that code and execute it again. Whoever
okay, separately we have to
send
the code to him.
Yes.
It's not we cannot give any permission, special permissions or privileges to that.
I mean, look at that. I mean,
right? It's hard coded in the code.
Well, I encrypted it, right? Now, and then I am the system admin here. I have full privilege on this instance in database. And even if I right click and modify it, it will not let me see that. Okay.
So only if you decrypt it,
You do have the
be
code,
able
you
to
have to
open it.
again
Whoever
run
has the
it.
code, and he can only modify that user-defined function.
Okay.
And replace with
Daniel,
Yes.
Daniel,
Yes.
when you say whoever has the code, are you talking about security or what?
No. Whoever has this code, the create statement or the alter statement. Whoever has
So,
access to that particular code, only way they can decrypt is execute that code. In order to execute that code, they need to have access to that code, right? I'm not talking about the security. I'm talking about the raw code. If I share this code with you, and then you can execute this statement to modify the user-defined function.
so whoever doesn't have the code cannot perform any task on this type of thing, right?
You cannot modify. You can still call it. You can call this function, no issues. But if you want to make some changes inside the function, you cannot do that.
Okay. Thank you.
How about delete?
Delete is a different thing. I can, as long as you have the security privilege to drop an object, you could able to do that. Drop is fine, but you cannot alter it.
Okay.
All right. So now, what you can do inside a user-defined function, that is up to your imagination and your requirement. Now, this is what the thing about TSQL programming is we are trying to reuse whatever we learned so far with our SQL statement. So if you look at the other objects we are going to cover with the TSQL user-defined function, then trigger, there is going to be a lot of new things will be discussed with trigger. But views and stored procedures, etc., these all are containers. These all are objects inside which you need to write the code which is going to satisfy your requirement. Okay, so whatever, you can based on your requirement, you can do whatever you want inside the user-defined function. So the only limitation is you cannot perform a transactional statement, but other than that, all other statements are possible inside a user-defined function. Now let's take a look at the inline table value user-defined function. That's the second one, right? The first one is scalar user-defined function. The second one is inline. And I mentioned that inline is rarely used because an easy replacement for inline is views, which we are going to see in tomorrow's class. All right. So, but for the academic purpose, you need to know what then inline table value user-defined function. Anybody remember what is the return value of a inline table value user-defined function?
A table.
A tabular structure, right? All right. So let me show you an example for inline. Okay. Create table. So not create table. Create function. The name of the function, I'm going to say it is dbo dot.
It's not mandatory to use DPO dot, right? You can give any name that you want.
Yeah, you don't need to, but I always prefer. It's always a good, even for creating the table. We did not do it from when we talk about tables, but when you are creating an object, it is always preferred to use the DB. That's going to increase the readability, especially if your database consists of a lot of schema. It's always a good practice. If by default, the default schema is DBO, but it's preferred to use that DBO along with that table. Any object you create prefix with the schema, even if it's a default one.
Okay.
All right. So gender. So employee, want to display employee by gender, and I'm going to say car, CHR, and this here's gender. car of 1, right? And returns what it is going to return.
Car of.
No, it is going to return all the information about a particular list of employees, all the male employees or female employees. I want to display employee ID, title, a couple of values. So returns, I'm not going to return a scalar value, I'm going to return a tabular value. So returns table. So if we say return table, that's going to be inline table value user defined function, as there is going to be only one statement in select. I'm going to put a star here for now. Okay. From human resource dot employee, where gender equals whatever that value passed by that input parameter. That's it. So the inline table value user defined function, there is going to be only in the body of the function, there is going to be only one statement, which is the return, and inside the return you can specify whatever that select statement. And then here I can create this.
So we don't want begin and end over here.
You don't need to, because if you have, like in C++, if you have only one statement inside a if condition or a body, then you don't need to say. You can definitely do begin and end, but it is not necessary.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, so I created that. Now, how do I call this? Because the output is going to be multi-column tabular structure, right? So because I have a star there. Now, if I go back here, if I want to call this function, select star. Now, a scalar user-defined function can be used anywhere. You can use a regular persistent column name, right? You can use it as part of the from clause, where clause, group by, or order by. All those places you can use that. How about the inline, where I can use an inline table value user-defined function?
Only in select statement, or where?
Which part of select statement? Wherever you can use a regular persistent table. So if I want to see all the male employees, all right. So wherever in place of a persistent table, you can use a scalar inline table value user defined function. If I execute this, here you go. All the male employees we have 290 employees. Out of that, 206 employees are male employees. And if I want to see the female employees, 84 female employees. So inline, the difference between a scalar and inline is that the scalar is going to return only one value back, a scalar value back. In the case of inline, it is going to return a tabular value back to the calling program. Because it is returning a tabular value, you need to use that wherever you can use a regular table.
Daniel, we can make a function like that. We can use a scalar too and inline too. Like if we have a requirement, we want like fully qualified name in an employee by gender, like that type of requirement.
I am sorry. Can you come over again? What is the requirement?
If we have a requirement, then we want fully qualified name with employee by gender.
Fully qualify. I can elaborate a little bit more. I am not getting that question.
Oh, we did in the SQL.
I'm sorry, I did not get that question properly.
We're saying the first function bit.
Sorry, I will say you again, like after some time.
Okay, all right. All right, so that is the inline, and very simple. And again, the workaround is, a better workaround is the views. Views has a lot of advantage comparing to inline. And can you apply the where clause here? What do you think? When you call the inline table value user defined function, can you apply the where clause? For
You already
example,
did. I think you already did.
well, that
I
is
think
no,
yes,
no.
you can.
Well, that is yes, I did that, but that is part of the function. I'm doing that inside that function. Now, whatever the output of that function, I want to filter it. After that. For example, I want to say the vacation hours, where I want to say is greater than 80. Still could able to do that. Okay, because when you look at that execution order, we discussed a couple of times before, it is first executing that from clause, then it is going to load that information into memory as an intermediate result set. Then on top of that intermediate result set, the where condition is going to be applied. So I mean, you can apply the where clause, group by, all those things can be done on this particular output. Now, the next one is multi-statement. Anybody remember what is the output of a multi-statement table value user defined function?
Tabular value.
Partition product.
Still going to be a table. It's a tabular structure. So inline and multi-statement, both cases, the output is going to be a tabular structure, but there is a difference. So in the case of a inline, the select statement you list here decide what is going to be the number of columns, right? In that particular number of columns and records is decided by this select statement. So in the case of an inline, you are not predefining the structure of the return table. It's all based on this highlighted select statement. But in the case of multi-statement, you predefine the structure of the return table first before you proceed further. So as part of the header of the function is nothing but this part, okay? This is the header and this is going to be the body. And if you go back to my user defined function, this is the header of the function and this is the body of the function. So in the inline, the body of the function decides what is going to be the structure of the return table. But in the case of multi-statement, we will see that all the structure of the return table is going to will be declared in the header of the function itself. So let's take.
Daniel, before you start with that, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
What if I have two parameters in inline table values?
Sure, you can decide. You can separate that.
And then there will be two return statements?
No, it's going to be one single return statement. You can pass two parameters,
okay.
and then you can use that parameter, both parameters as part of the select statement. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. So
when I call the function, I should give both the parameter values, right?
Sure. Let's take an example here. I want to find the top 10 employees based on the gender we are trying to, or top n number of employees based on the gender I'm trying to pass in. So I want to also provide the top n number of top n number of records based on their birth date. Okay, I want to, whether it's a male employees or female employees, I also want to specify the top n number of employees I want to display based on the birth date. So let's see how we can do that. So I'm going to pass one more input parameter here.
Same with the scalar too, right? I can have any number of parameters. Yes. Only difference is what the value returning, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So this is going top rec and int top rec, and I'm going to call it as and then if I so my intention is that I'm going to call this function specifying what is the gender, and then I also want to specify the top n number of records I want to display. So top int star, right?
You think so? You have to provide. Okay, yeah.
So
You should give some value to the
Comma.
very top end, right? Do we have to declare and
what's that?
You should
Decrease.
there should be some value in int top rec, right?
comma between the
Yeah,
top.
comma, dot, record, and star.
No, I have a comma between those two.
No, in the
No,
select
in the
statement.
select
Select
statement.
statement.
Line 94.
94 top.
No, after that, yes.
No, because the top instead of 10, I mean, this is supposed to be like this, right?
Hmm.
My intention is, hold on a second.
But there should be some value in int top rec, right?
Well, that's
Or
something
do
you
we
pass
have
in.
to?
You are trying to pass in that value.
Okay, okay, okay.
It is not working. Well, I have a similar example here in my cheat sheet. Hold on a second. How did I do that? Oh, I think I need to put that inside a
You have to
bracket.
provide an ascending or descending order too.
No, well, you don't. I mean, if you don't provide that by default, it is going to be ascending. So you need to put that. If you are using a parameter, to put that in a bracket. All right. So let's do that. All right. So it's already there. So I need to alter it because we already created that, right? Here we go. All right. So that's created. Now let's go back to our calling statement. So I want to see the top 10 female employees based on their birth date. Okay. All right. Here we go.
So here you don't want to specify the function name. It's just calling with the table and the parameters.
No, this is a function name, right? Employee by gender.
Oh, okay.
Gender is the function name, and then two parameters. You're providing the value, so that's the way it works.
Okay, thank you.
Daniel, I have a question.
Yes.
When we are calling the function, in that we can use the order by clause or group by where.
You can
Anything?
definitely, yes.
Okay.
In that calling statement, you can use the order by, where clause, all those things can be done but again, that is going to be that where clause or order by clause you apply here you are providing here is going to be applied on top of the result returned by that function. Okay. All right, so we have 15 more minutes. Let's talk about the multi-statement table value user defined function. In the case of multi-statement, you need to specify the structure of the return value. So I'm going to create a table here called as a multi-statement called as my employee list. Okay, and so that's going to be the name of the function. And then normally in the previous two examples, returns followed by in the scalar user defined function, you define a data type, right? It can be varchar or integer date, whatever the data type is, based on what type of value you are returning back to calling program. In the case of inline user, returns followed by a table. Okay, but here I'm creating a table. I need to. Here also I'm going to return a tabular structure back to the calling program, but that tabular structure is going to be the structure of that table is going to be defined at the header of that function. So you can see that emp list is a table data type, and because it's a table data type, you can also specify the columns in that. So I'm going to say employee ID and the full name, the phone number. I mean, I provided a couple of information here. So this is going to be the structure of that return table. The structure of the return table consists of 3 columns: employee ID, full name, and phone number. Okay. So there's no select statement involved in it. It's you define the structure up front. Now after that, and by the way, you can use that encryption with multi-statement and inline too. Okay, so that's applicable to all kind of functions, views, start procedures, etc. Now inside this multi-statement, how do I insert a value into this employee list? Well, that you can use a regular insert statement. So insert into followed by
Daniel, I am not getting that. What is employee list? That's a table or
employee list is a table variable. It is again a variable, but it is because the data type is a table, it contains multiple columns. So this is, we will have further discussion on table variables. What's the difference between a table variable and temporary table, etc. That's a different topic. But at this point, you need to understand that a employee list is nothing but a table variable. It's nothing but a variable, but it is having a tabular structure. Okay. So
okay, then it will the function will return the value in the tabular form, right?
Right. That's right. So because it's a table variable, I can do an insert. Can I perform an insert statement into a persistent table in a user-defined function? Can I perform an insert statement in a persistent table in a user-defined? No, you cannot, right? But now normally students ask this question because when we're talking about scalar user-defined function, I said that you cannot perform any insert statement. Now I'm using an insert statement here. The reason is because I'm not inserting to a persistent table, I'm inserting to a table variable which is in memory. So that is allowed. So George, fully, and then phone number is right. So I'm inserting one record, and then only difference is that the multi-statement, it is your responsibility to manually insert the record before that table variable returned back to the calling program. But in the case of inline, the select statement will take care of that. So here I have multiple statements here, so it's going to be 2 and all right. So once all these records are inserted, what's going to be the next one? You need to say return, and then all those records will be returned back to the calling program. So I created this my employee list, and let's take a look. So if I want to call these functions, again select start from wherever you can use a regular table. In all those places you can use, and there's no input parameter. If there is an input parameter, you can definitely pass that. But if I do a select statement here, you got the result.
So it is as good as creating a separate table and inserting data into that.
That's right.
The use of
Well, old days we used that as a method to dynamically generate a certain list of records we used to have inline. But which is the other method we learned in the previous class? If we want to dynamically generate a record set, there is another method. Anybody remember we covered that?
The common table expression?
No. If you want to generate records on the fly. Row constructor. Anybody remember the row constructor? We We talked about
Yes.
that example
Yes.
which we talked about, the currency code and the currency name, right? So you can use that. I mean, still you can use multi-statement. There's nothing wrong if you want to, if instead of creating a record with a lot of, I mean, instead of creating a table, persistent table with all the US state. Let's say I want to, display all all the 50 states of United States along with the state name and the state code. You can create a persistent table, right? Persistent table and store that information, or you create a multi-statement table value used to define like this, and then whenever you need it, do a select statement on it, you get the same result. Okay. Now the interview question and the certificate. Can you use select statement inside values? Sorry, I did not get that. Can you use select statement inside values? You mean in place of this? You can, yes. Instead of providing the value, you can use that classic insert into with a select statement we discussed before, right? This entire value part can
Taking
be
data
replaced
from
by
out.
a select statement. That is perfectly good. So is it clear what is the difference between inline and multi-statement? Any questions? All right. But inline and multi-statement, I covered that just for academic purpose. We 99% of the time we will be using scalar user-defined function. Now it's 10:53. We don't have the time now, but tomorrow one of the students actually asked that question earlier. Is there any way you can um, join the result of a function? When function mean the sense there are only two functions which can return tabular structure, right? The inline and multi-statement. Now the question is it possible to join the result of a inline or multi-statement with a persistent table? I mentioned that there is a method called as cross apply and outer apply. We'll be seeing that in tomorrow's class. All right. Now there is, I mean, just for your information, there are three with options available with the scalar user defined, not scalar, with functions, triggers, stored procedures, and views. There are three with options. The first one is with encryption. There are two more. I just want to put it here, but we will see that later. The second with option is called as with schema binding. This is also a certification exam question and interview question too, with schema binding. Then the third one is called as with execute as. Let's say Daniel. Okay. For stored procedures, there is one more called as with recompile. Now you don't need to worry about these three additional with options, which we will be covering this. Two of them, this one with schema binding, we'll be covering that in tomorrow's class. When we talk about the security architecture, we will see what that with execute as, and then when we talk about stored procedure, we will see with recompile. With recompile is not applicable to user defined function. This is only for stored procedures. Okay.
Can we use encryption and store
Yes,
procedures as well?
encryption,
Okay.
schema binding, and execute as is applicable to all kind of functions, views, triggers, and stored procedures. Yes. So when we're covering those, we are not going to talk about schema, the encryption, because we already covered that along with user-defined function.
We can only use one at a time, right?
You can use
From this four?
no. You can use all four. You can use all four.
They
Okay.
give us same result, right?
Same result in the sense, no, it's different result. With schema binding is different from with encryption, which is different from execute as. It's for four different purposes. But if you're asking me encryption, am I going to get the same result for encryption, whether it is being used by user-defined function and stored procedures? Yes, it is going to hide the statements, hide the body of that particular object.
Okay.
Okay, guys.
Daniel, when you upload this file, can you please add the function calling statements too?
Yeah, that is going to be class 15b.
Is it different? Okay,
It's
okay,
going to be two worksheets, A and B. The B is
okay,
the one. This is the one I'm going. This is the B.
okay.